Welcome to Pegwarmers. I'm Kevin.
I'm John.
I'm Brian.
And we're here to talk about toys, or books related to toys, as it were. Today, our topic is the G.I. Joe Find Your Fate books. I've got two experts on this topic here, with Hooded Cobra Commander being a G.I. Joe fan, and John being an expert on these choose-your-own-adventure, non-linear narrative type books. Hoodie, I'm super excited you're back to doing reviews.
Oh, thank you. Me too. I've been away from it for a few months, and finally, I've got the time to get back into it. I got the new review up. I've also got the next review in the works, so hopefully we can get back to doing it regularly. So yeah, I'm excited to be back.
Awesome. And John, what have you been up to since we did Choose Your Own Adventure books and also pack-in mini comics before?
Well, back to teaching, which takes most of the time. I've published a few new pieces, but I've been focusing mostly on interactive poetry right now. I've got a piece up on voidspacezine.com, which is probably the easiest piece to find. And just to play some new formats and some new ways to interact with the story, the narrative, and the audience, like always.
Nice. All right, very cool. So the Find Your Fate books, this is like a Choose Your Own Adventure book. You start reading a story, and at a certain point, it tells you to make a decision. You can follow airtight to the landing pad on page 3, or you can attack the Crimson Guards on page 6. And as you read, you find out what happens. There are sometimes, I guess, more than one way to kind of get to the end, or there's only one real way to get to a satisfying ending. I'm not sure how complex the decision trees are in these books, but I remember being totally stumped as a kid with how to beat these books and get my Joe to the end.
Well, you always play too nice.
Yeah.
You always wanted to save everybody and do everything exactly right, and you died.
Right.
Yeah, it does trick you. What looks like the obvious right decision turns out to be the one that gets you killed.
Yes, that 5-finger bookmark. You're gonna stick the page, one finger in where you are, and then the next 3 where you need to go, and kind of figure out from there. When you finally get frustrated, just want to see how to actually beat the book. Yeah.
My sister, when I was a kid, one time I got one of these from the library and got very frustrated with it. And my sister found like the end. Went to the back of the book, which I guess was the final ending, and then she worked backwards from there somehow and read it to me actually, like in order, or a order that worked, that got to a successful ending. So that was my one successful route, but it took my genius sister to figure that out for me. So each
and we should say that the Find Your Fate and Find Your Fate Junior, they handle a lot of the licensing. So you'll see that kind of moniker slapped on top of the G.I. Joe books, the Transformer books, the Jim and the Hologram books, Indiana Jones, and some of the James Bond Jr. books. Because they were really the kind of a game book that was working with other brands and other pieces. So today we're talking about G.I. Joe, but there's a lot of those 80s brands that get picked up in that same broader series.
Yeah, there was definitely a working deal with Hasbro there with Transformers and G.I. Joe and Gem, but they also worked with other licensors for sure.
It had to be a challenge for the writers because, I mean, a lot of these guys probably didn't come from, those toy lines, but had to be at least proficient with it enough that they could write one of these stories with these characters, and obviously it wouldn't fit in the continuity of the animated series or the comic book, but it would have to be at least recognizable to to the reader. So you can't have Snake Eyes doing any long soliloquies,
right?
Things like that. So yeah, that had to be a challenge, I would think.
I don't know if they would have sent them like photocopies of the file cards or the animated series Bible or something, but they had to have given them some sort of reference to who these
characters were. They had to have some sort of Bible to work off of, some sort of, do this, don't do this kind of tips and guides. Most of their generic military action 80s movies. You could picture Chuck Norris doing all of these. Oddly enough, the Chuck Norris Commandos cartoon does not have a game book. But you could swap Snake Eyes for Chuck Norris and the book still works. They're generic enough. There is no continuity between the books or with any other G.I. Joe media that's out there.
So each one of the books, almost all of them have a title Operation something. It's not quite a uniform system. There is at least one book that breaks away from that. But I have book number 2 here in front of me, and I find it interesting because it's Operation Dragonfire, which was a title of an animated series miniseries later. I don't think that I think it's completely coincidental. The Dragonfire is just a really awesome term to use for marketing kid stuff, but it's funny to see it used twice in G.I. Joe history there.
Yeah, and wasn't the miniseries called Operation Dragonfire? Not just Dragonfire, but like Operation Dragonfire. They just and this came out definitely before that, but amazing coincidence. Probably just a coincidence, but just that there are only so many awesome names that you can. There's an index of awesome names, and you just got to go through those.
Right.
And dragon isn't half of them. So if it says dragon anything, you've made 8-year-olds buy it.
Dragon Wing, Dragon Talon, Dragonfire.
Dragonfire. And that's 1985. I'd like to point out that they were the first printing of these are in 1985. By 1986, the first one was in its 5th printing. So these were selling pretty well, and probably 5 times in the expectations of whatever they thought they were going to move, because within a year they were on a 5th printing of these books.
Actually, very impressive. Yeah.
The later books, of course, like any long-going series, later books are harder to find because they weren't reprinted nearly as much. But these early books, you can find 1 or 2 different cover variations, and a lot of them out there floating around.
So the first book is called Operation Star Raider. It's by Eric Affabee. Do you guys have the code name for that episode as Wise Guy?
Wise Guy, yep.
Wise Guy.
Yep.
So
and in all these stories, let's go ahead and throw in there right quick. The reader is always the you.
Right.
So there is a code name that the characters sometimes mention. Sometimes they're like, "Hey, you kid," or just "Hey, you." Sometimes they'll throw around some wise guy. So the you of the reader is in the story in a second person point of view kind of way. And the wise guy is mentioned some, not necessarily every time that they're in conversation. Mostly it's the you that puts you in that position.
Right. Yeah, they talk directly to you, occasionally using the code name. And I think it's a good idea to give the code name just because the code names are part of what's fun with G.I. Joe. Everybody has one. And there's got to be occasional writing complications if you always have to refer to somebody as you.
It's a tricky thing to do long term.
Yeah. So having a code name for people is great. So that way Hawk can say, this team is going to be Wise Guy, Snake Eyes, and Scarlet over here versus you, Snake Eyes, and Scarlet. But that first one obviously did well and, kicked off the series. I don't know whether they tried to do a whole bunch at once. Like how many basically they ordered in a batch.
Publication history is not quite well documented for a lot of these game books. They were disposable media. They weren't collected like comic books were early on in that same time period. We know a lot more about the Larry Hama run than we do the history of these in a lot of ways.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure they released at least the first 5 at the same time, which is pretty typical for the companies that were working with licenses and their own products. TSRs, Endless Quest, they dropped 5 of them to see if they'd work in the market. They did. And so they followed up with some more non-Rose Estes books. And I think the same thing's happening here with the Find Your Fate. Choose Your Own Adventure is kind of releasing 5 or 10 at a time sometimes. So I think that's kind of a big batch to get the first few out.
It makes sense because if you're going to spend the money on the license, you're not going to print just one and hope it does well before if you're investing enough for a license, you're going to invest enough to commission several books to be written. The second book, which we kind of joked about already, Operation Dragonfire by William Snow. You are Spider in that one, which is a interesting name for a Joe.
That's on the list of awesome names, though. That's in that same book, yeah.
Spider.
Yep.
I have book number 2 actually right here. This one's got a great cover with Duke and Lady J on it. I'm not sure if this one's a Hector Garrido one. A lot of them are Hector Garrido.
The illustrator, the cover artist is noted on the inside. This one is a Carl Kassler cover illustration. And I think he did the first 5, and then Hector Garrido did the rest, as my recollection.
Gotcha. Okay, so
Carl Kessler's doing the exterior, the cover shot, the money shot there. They sell the book to you, and then the interior is by a different artist.
Yes.
Whose name I just had and I forgot. David
in a totally different style. The interior artist is David Henderson. Yes, David Henderson.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the black and white kind of sketchy pencil art kind of thing going on.
And there's not a lot of illustrations in these.
Yeah.
just a handful.
Just a handful, spot illustrations. Usually a
Yeah.
full page spot illustration. Yep.
Yep.
The illustrations in these are kind of plain. I guess you would say the style is very, I don't know, simple. And I'm sure that serves the story. But I also wonder if there wasn't a whole lot of reference to work from when the assignment was given to the artist. But yeah, the illustrations are quite. Hey, Optimus.
Yeah, when we jump into the Transformers, we see like very similar interior illustrations. To me, I'm thinking very in-house, very somebody that did not draw comics or toys for a living.
Yeah.
Now tasked to do 15 pictures in a day.
And it's fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just
This is a better Megatron than I can do. Yep.
It's pretty basic.
Especially I do think the
compared
Transformers
to the
art looked a little bit
art,
better than the G.I. Joe art overall. If you kind of compare series.
I like this one from number 3, where everybody is just kind of staring at you awkwardly,
Right?
like making you awfully uncomfortable.
Yeah, so the original books, they're a little bit more they're realistic style, paintings of the characters, but when you get to those Hector Garrido ones in the next kind of batch, they are very reminiscent of the card art. In fact, sometimes looks like Hector repainted the card art. But that in and of itself is kind of a very nostalgic or eye-catching thing for the kids to see. Oh, it is exactly G.I. Joe. Like it's so instantly recognizable. I mean, Snake Eyes on this one is in the same pose as he is on his card art, but Flint is in a new pose. So.
Yeah.
I think a lot of toy collectors are picking these up just for the covers.
Yeah,
I think so.
I'm guessing some people in your audience have an entire set of these and have never actually tried to read them.
Probably.
The Hector Garrido art is like, especially if you appreciate the artwork, it's like getting a variation on the card art. It's like a variation that maybe a lot of people aren't familiar with, but it's the same, but it's different. Like this, I think you showed the Baroness. This is the Baroness without glasses.
Huh.
Just little things like that. It's a different take on something that we're very familiar with.
Yeah, that's cool. The third book is called Terror Trap by G.V. McCrae. And in that book, you are Dog-Ear based on your experience battling street toughs.
Yeah. Because that's the kind of the code name you would get, on the street.
And that's how they recruit G.I. Joes, is people who battle street toughs.
And that's not the best code name overall. But I do like the way the code name fits into the backstory in that one.
Yeah.
Also funny for a paperback book to have a code name of Dog-Ear.
Oh, yeah.
Oddly, that wasn't in that list. That wasn't in the list of awesome names. But that had to be creative sometimes.
Yeah, good backstory though.
Does anybody have a copy of number 3?
Yeah, I got 3.
Oh, there it is. Nice. That's a Dusty on the
Terror
front.
Trap.
Ooh,
you've got
Quick Kick in his classic.
There. Quick Kick. That sand's got to be really hot on Quick Kick's bare feet there.
And kicking Destro in the head is also pretty rough.
Yeah, that's. I think Quick Kick has hurt himself more than he has hurt Destro there, but there you go.
The fourth book is called Operation Robot Assassin by William and Megan Stine. And your skills at defusing bombs and other explosive situations has earned you the codename Hotshot.
Yep.
I got to make a couple of comments about this. First of all, the cover says, by H. William Stine and Megan Stine, but on the inside, it says by G.V. McCrae. So, oops. But also, this book opens with probably my favorite scene from the whole series, where Hawk introduces you to the team by pulling the pin on a hand grenade and throwing it to you, and you have to defuse it before it goes off. That's your intro.
All right.
When I read these on the show, this is a favorite. This one, we have to go back and revisit this one because this gets a lot of giggles.
Just risk the whole team.
Yeah,
because his skills are that good.
Yeah, you can defuse a hand grenade.
So, William and Megan Stine, is this connected to the R.L. Stine of Goosebumps fame and other G.I. Joe books?
As far as I can tell. There are about 4 or 5 different R.L. Stine pen names, kind of pre-Goosebumps. He was writing under several different names, Jovial Bob, I think there's at least 3 to 4 different R.L. Stine pen names running through this series. The next book by Eric Appleby is going to be an R.L. Stine pen name too.
Okay.
I don't have the full list of Stine pseudonyms up, but there's a lot of Stine in this series. And he hasn't quite become the Goosebumps guy yet at this point in his career, and so they don't want him to have his name on too many book covers. This was 10 years later, his name would be on all of them.
Yeah.
Because, of course it would. Reprints that are never going to happen would put R.L. Stine big on the cover.
Yeah, that's funny. The next book, number 5, is called Everglades Swamp Terror. The Everglades Swamp Terror, not an Operation one this time. And it's by Eric Appleby, which you mentioned is R.L. Stine. And again, you're a wise guy. Is this the same wise guy? A different wise guy? I don't think I've read that one to know.
In number 5, I know he's definitely a strategy specialist or wise guy. I don't think he was a strategy specialist that generically in the first one. I think it's a different wise guy.
Interesting that they would, reuse a name and not have it connect or have it be a different guy. I was actually kind of hoping that some of these names would have ended up getting used in G.I. Joe. That would be a really funny twist that you become a member of the G.I. Joe, kind of like Steel Brigade. But they're all just a little too generic, I guess, to make it through the review process. If Larry Hama had suggested some of these names, Kurt Bazigian would have been like, what else you got,
Yeah, they do kind of sound like prototype code names. But I mean, Wise Guy is not too bad. Spider is not too bad. Hot Shot, I like Hot Shot.
Yeah,
we got Hot Shot coming up. That's pretty cool.
Especially as a bomb specialist.
Yeah.
So there were some good options. But you're probably right. They're probably would be considered a little too generic, but maybe that's why they're too generic, because they're supposed to be the generic.
Right, the anybody. Yeah.
When we get into Operation Deathstone, the 6th book by Barbara and Scott Siegel coming out in '86, kind of finally hitting that next wave of books, I'm pretty sure. You're outlaw, and your main character traits, you don't follow the rules, and so you're outlaw, which makes a lot of sense from a backstory perspective, but just doesn't feel like a G.I. Joe good guy name to be outlaw.
Yeah. It's a little odd. Right. It'd be good if you were like a Dreadnought or something in this one.
It'd make a great Dreadnought name. I just don't see Outlaw and Law and Order really teaming up.
Right. And they didn't really give you the opportunity to be a Cobra agent. You were always fighting on the good guys' side. That would have been a cool take, though, if they could have given you the Cobra side of a story in one of these. But I suppose, they probably didn't want to promote terrorism among our youth. So,
well, the cartoon and the comic get sympathetic with the Cobras every once in a while, but no, these books, you're very much going to be the good guy whether you want to be or not.
Yeah.
Even the threshold of choices you have to make. I was laughing because in our earlier video, Kevin had said he couldn't finish his books because he always tried to save everybody.
Yeah,
but your threshold of choices are good or other good. You can't just shoot the guard and walk in through the room. There's not a real moral gray area to any of this storytelling.
It would be kind of fun if you started out as a Cobra and through the options you could become a good guy. Like at the end, it often happened in the cartoon show where somebody would somehow help the Joes and they would be like, hey, you want to be an honorary G.I. Joe? Never to be seen again in a future episode of the cartoon.
I have to assume that they weren't thinking that kids were just reading this all as a series and that a lot of kids would just pick up one book.
Yeah.
And so it's got to be kind of a self-contained thing. But even so, a little variation I think would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that would be
fun. These are affordable, nice little quick pickups. There's $1.95 in 1986 money. $2, I think, by the end of the series. A lot of libraries were stocking these, though, so you could just pick up 1 or 2 at your local library who may not even have the entire series. They just have 4 or 5 out of the ever many. So,
book number 7 was Operation Deadly Decoy. That's got some nice alliteration going on there. This one by R.L. Stine. And you are Presto, Master of Disguise and Misdirection. So you get to be a little bit like Zartan in this one. Or like Lady J in the cartoon, who always happened to have a rubber mask that worked for every situation.
And this one definitely feels like a Stine character. Just Presto the Magician just feels like a Stine joke.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. Deadly Decoy. It's interesting because we had Deathstone and then Deadly Decoy. I feel like the word death and deadly and things like that often get censored on kids' media nowadays. Like the Power Rangers are always, like the monster, I'll destroy you. They try and sort of skirt around kill and death, those words a lot. But in the 80s, it was still kind of okay for a lot of these titles.
Death Stone, Deadly Decoy, then Death Ray is the next one. Book 8
Death
Death
Ray.
Ray.
We got death all over, and death in the interior as well. These stories include lots of death. They're surprisingly violent.
You can lose, absolutely.
Yes.
You can, right.
And you don't just get captured all the time.
Yeah, they're morally gray, but you can definitely lose.
Yeah, it's not ambiguous either. It's like,
no.
And your last words are this as you fade out. Too bad you'll never know what happens because you're dead.
Right. Yeah, when we get to the Thundercats, you've got some nice ghosts, warriors, and still not the typical modern media sensibility for kids.
Yeah. The 8th book, Death Ray, which Operation Death Ray we just mentioned, you are break-in. Your specialities are dismantling security systems, gaining access to heavily guarded areas, and scuba diving, because that fits in with the other two. Break-in, I think, is actually a pretty good code name. I could see that being a Joe.
It's better than Cool Breeze. It's not bad. That's probably a bit closer to one that you might see on an action figure. Maybe slightly less generic. I mean, it's kind of specific. I mean, this is his job, But yeah, that's maybe a little less generic than some of these others. Wise Guy, I don't know. I think Wise Guy is still my favorite out of these, but that one's probably the one, that you more likely see on an action figure.
And the description that you just gave for it really feels more like a file card. Break in, dismantling security system, and scuba diving. Those file cards just love that extra weird specialty training.
Heavy machine gun operator and chef.
Right.
The next book, number 9, is Operation Mindbender, and this is one of the ones that has R.L. Stine's name on the front. And the back cover, I mean, this is where I kind of got those descriptions, but it says, Army spy planes have picked up evidence of covert military operations on a small island in the South Pacific. Your team, Leatherneck, Airtight, Beachhead, and you, Commando, have been sent to investigate. And it continues from there. But it really kind of gets you like jazzed up. The back is great about giving you that sort of like, here's the mission, get going kind of thing, which I think is great for attracting kids' attention.
Absolutely. I was just looking at a modern game book writer who's publishing right now, 2021, 2022, and their back text was not this good.
Okay.
I mean, quite honestly, I'd rather read any of the ones we're reading off than that series I was just looking at tonight. And it's probably better back text than my books have, quite honestly. I'd read these.
One of the things I want to do, I have not read this one, but because it features Beachhead, my favorite Joe, I want to kind of read through this sometime and see if his characterization matches more with his cartoon version or his file card version. Because his file card specifically says he's cool under fire, but in the cartoon, he is mad about everything. So I kind of want to see how his characterization is in this book. I don't know how accurate it'll be, but it might give you a little bit of an idea of which Bible they might have been handed to write the books.
Do you remember how Beachhead this one was?
He's asking if you know how Beachhead acted in this one.
Oh, I don't recall right offhand. In fact, I don't remember much of Beachhead in this one. I know he's in it, but no, I don't remember. I feel like I know I've read this before, but I think we went on a mission that either didn't include Beachhead or didn't have him in it very much. So I don't exactly recall. But I am curious. I know we don't have a lot of the history of these books from behind the scenes, but I'm curious about how the character selection was made. Because let's see, we've got Beachhead 1986, Leatherneck 1986, but then Airtight, so it's. How they selected the characters, I think that's very interesting. If it's something where they just got a list and these are the guys you need to include, or if they got to at least have a menu that they could pick of some characters that might go with the story.
Next time everybody sees R.L. Stine doing a book reading or a tour anywhere, just take your G.I. Joes with you and just start asking every question we need answered. There's
Yes.
an oral history that still exists that won't exist much longer.
Yeah.
10 or 15 years, that oral history will be gone completely. And R.L. Stine's probably easier to find than James M. Ward and William Snow, if they ever existed.
I wonder if they were given a list of like, you need to include these characters because they're new, like if Stine wrote half of these books in each one of the waves, it may have been like, please use, as many of these characters as you can. But if he had written some from the first wave, he might have just been like, oh yeah, I'll use that airtight guy again. Or, maybe they did say, because a lot of the figures were available like on pegs for more than 1 year. So using somebody from the previous year didn't really hurt you. And like Hawk and Duke are probably in everything because they just are the perennial characters.
I know Larry occasionally had to include a few characters or vehicles in the comic book. They're like, hey, this is coming out at this time. We need it in the comic book. But he also had a lot of latitude to reuse characters that maybe weren't on the pegs. They may have had a similar approach to this, but maybe not, because they're dealing with authors that maybe aren't as intimately familiar with the material. So they may not have wanted to give them quite that much leeway. I don't know.
I would expect they had less leeway than Larry Hama did because they weren't developing an ongoing story for 30 years. They were just doing one-shots. And honestly, I wonder if they had code names in there at all, or if they just said Soldier 1, Soldier 2, Soldier 3, handed it back to Hasbro, and Hasbro's like, that's a beachhead. That's probably airtight. Let's just throw a picture beside of it. That looks like Destro. Keep moving.
Really good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, that's very well could have been.
So I'm skimming through the book, just kind of looking for Beachhead, and he's under mind control for most of the book. So there probably isn't any good characterization of him throughout it because he's not himself through most of it.
I think that's why it didn't register that much memory of Beachhead being in there.
Right.
That's a smart workaround, though. Have a little mind control going on. Now the characterization doesn't have to match anybody ever.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
So the next book, number 10, is Operation Night Flight, and you are Delta. That's the one I had shown earlier with Snake Eyes, Flint, and Breaker on the cover. So that's interesting. Breaker being an 82, 83 figure. They've kind of spanned the whole gamut of characters there.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm saying. Like this, these guys, at least that guy right there, had not been on the pegs for quite some time. But hey, but I'm a Breaker fan. Breaker was my first ever G.I. Joe action figure, so it is pretty wicked cool to see him on the cover of this totally new interpretation of Breaker that isn't anywhere else. That's nothing like the card art, nothing like anything else. That's just awesome.
You also get a full page sketch there of Delta, very generic guy with a hood and a rifle.
Yeah.
So this one is William Snow. So again, one of these authors not sure if that's a R.L. Stine pen name or somebody different. There's some planes featured in this book that are definitely not G.I. Joe toys.
Right.
So again, whether the artist had lists of everything or that was just their drawing of the book might reference Sky Strikers and the artist didn't know what a Sky Striker looked like.
Yeah.
Or it might be something
the in-house artist on the interiors definitely has very little reference material they're working off of. The cover artists seem to have a lot more leeway, but a lot better references. These interiors are generic.
Zorana dressed in Hawk's uniform there with a mask in her hand. It's kind of cool.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, hiring Hector, you have somebody that's intimately familiar with the character because he painted almost all the card backs. But yeah, the guy on the inside, and it does give credit to those artists. They were probably just, in-house artists for Baltimore Books or whoever printed these, and Random House, probably was not a G.I. Joe fan in any way or had much familiarity with the brand.
Yeah, and again, it's serviceable. I mean, it shows what's on the page. It's just simple. It's just very basic.
Yeah. Book number 11 is Operation Weapons Disaster by James M. Ward, and you are Wheels. I assume that's a vehicle operator.
Yep. Not Jason the Wheeled Warriors, just Wheels.
It says your assignment, weapons specialist. Oh yeah, your major talent, driving anything that moves.
There you go. So what that one featured the stun on the front cover of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty cool because a lot of these. I mean, a few of them have vehicles, like the Night Flight one had the Viper gliders on it, but most of them are just characters. You know.
Looks like it's got a rare team up between Storm Shadow and a Dreadnought.
Yeah. The 12th book in the series is called Operation Jungle Doom by Lynn Beach. And Lynn Beach, from just a little bit of research I did, wrote a lot of like young literature from various series. Young adult or kid literature. Different
that 6 to 10-year-old kind of range, I think, is a lot of it.
Yeah, for a lot of different like fantasy type series books and things like that.
A lot of work for hire, working on somebody else's series. I don't know if Lynn Beach has like a series they developed themselves, or it's just all Hasbro product kind of placement pieces. But yeah.
Yeah, and your code name is Lightning, which that's a pretty badass nickname, code name to have. Jungle Doom also makes me think of Operation Jungle Trap, but Jungle Trap is an episode of the cartoon. But you're getting those kind of military and environmental terms that kind of get shaken up, mixed up, and there we go. We've got a title here. The 13th book is called Operation Snow Job by Barbara and Scott Siegel. And I thought that was an interesting one because we know that Snow Job is a term, but for G.I. Joe, it's also a character.
Right.
And I don't know if Snow Job's in that book or not. I don't have that one to look through.
I don't have that one either.
But you are Compass in that book, which I guess is a decent name. Probably a land nav expert. The book has something to do with the polar ice caps melting. And that's where the Snow Job title comes from. The 14th book, Operation Thunderbolt, and you are Zapper, a sharpshooter and electronics expert. This is the one with Shipwreck on the cover and the shark. Nice. So great Zapper, cover. Interesting, is so close to Zap, which is actually a G.I. Joe. Yeah. A little surprised Hasbro wouldn't come back and say, can you think of another nickname?
What I find interesting is this cover has like 1985 Shipwreck, 1984 Shark, 1986 Conquest. It's just like, this is just from like the whole catalog here.
Yeah.
And this is 1987. This one first comes out. This is an 87 series book. Yep.
One of the things I also kind of wanted to mention is in 1986, G.I. Joe's whole marketing branding was Live the Adventure. And these books, even though they started before 86, they tie in so perfectly because you are a G.I. Joe in all these books. It really was kind of like branding made in heaven for that kind of thing. And I almost wonder if maybe that's part of how they got that idea was through like, they're looking at this kind of marketing strategy and like, oh, we should promote kids being G.I. Joes. That 86 catalog with the kid with the walking stick, meeting up with the Joes about to fight Cobra is hilarious, but it's exactly what's happening in all of these books. You're a kid and you're on the Joe team.
A short time later, they released Steel Brigade as the fan insert figure.
Yeah.
And I guess it was after this time.
It must have been.
If they had a Steel Brigade or a series with Steel Brigade, that might make it feel more like it has a continuity. Like if all the characters were just Steel Brigade, and by the way, you can buy the toy.
Right. If you could have had really 3 books where you were Steel Brigade and you had the mail away coupon on the back to get your toy, heck yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
I remember in middle school collecting Magic the Gathering novels, and there was a page in the back you could cut out and mail away for an exclusive Magic card. And just being super excited. I enjoyed the books, but also was like obsessed with getting that rare card. And that could have been a great tie-in,
Yeah, because it is what that they're doing the same thing. They're both fan insertion, media. But that's one where you can have the tangible action figure to go along with it. Plus, we've talked. I think it was touched on before, but like, there isn't exactly a continuity through these things, and it would be hard to do that anyway, since you have different outcomes depending on what choices that you make. But having like a character, like this is your character, that runs through the series would at least make it feel like it had more of a continuity. I think you could still do, the self-contained stories, but you could also, give a little bit of a reward to someone who does read the whole series.
And these are being sold comparable to your Choose Your Own Adventure, the other major American choice-based path books, which almost never had a continuity. Sometimes they had a loose kingdom where 3 or 4 books were set in, but they really weren't a continuous piece. About this same time and across the pond in England, you've got Joe Deaver, which does have a continuity. There's always a good ending. That good ending goes to the next book. Everything else you're dead in. And if you can, win the book, you can proceed to the next book, like leveling up in a video game. But the American market at the time was very disconnected. We get to Choose Your Own Adventure. You see some of the same authors bringing back a few kind of nods as if there's a little bit of a continuity there. But for the most part, this is just a non-continuous market.
It's pretty tough to expect a kid to get, everything in a series. They're not making those buying decisions for themselves. Like, very few kids I knew even had every G.I. Joe from a particular year, let alone every novel. I mean, I was a pretty avid comic book collector as a kid, and it was rare for me to have every issue of any series I read. I would, get a handful in a row and kind of get a grasp of the story, and then miss a couple issues and have some other random issues from a back issue bin, and I have no idea how these stories connect. And years later, actually, the way I read the G.I. Joe comics was that way. I started kind of in the middle. I was getting them regularly and then finding old issues. And all of a sudden, I got the issue that was like the funeral for General Flagg, and it connected so many things. I was like, oh, like I get all of this now. I finally have read enough to connect it all. So, it probably is smart that they're not connecting them all.
Yeah, if you did any kind of continuity with it, it would have to be just like a really thin continuity, like maybe a few winks and nods to some earlier books. But yeah, I mean, kids don't necessarily get the whole series, and any one of those books could be a kid's first book in the series, so they've got to be able to pick it up and read it and enjoy it.
Yeah.
And they've not done any of these in decades now, or 30 years now. I wonder if they brought it back, if they would build more continuity into it. We see a lot of the kind of Harry Potter, Aragon, continuity matters. Lemony Snicket's has 36 books, but we expect the kid to read all of those. My daughter's reading the Magnus Chase, Percy Jackson, Riordan books right now, and we own lots of them.
Yeah, I think that's definitely more built into kid literature and kid like life, pop culture. Even now that we were making movie series that last 10 years, like the Marvel movies or even Star Wars, that every decade gets a new batch of installments, like that sort of mind shift has changed a lot. So it could be definitely something they could do some continuity. And I could see it if they were doing them based on like one of the cartoon series. Like, had they done them for G.I. Joe Renegades or G.I. Joe, Spy Troops or something like that, I could see them doing more continuity because it's sort of themed around a short window of promotional material versus, the original series where it was just like, we're going to make G.I. Joe until it stopped being popular. And it didn't really have like specific segments that it was promoting or storylines that it was promoting throughout the history of it.
Hasbro did release at least one, maybe a couple young reader books, G.I. Joe young reader books recently. I haven't picked them up. I intended to. I'll try to get around to them, but my understanding is it's very different. It's very much focused on today's youth. But if they were to revisit this kind of idea, the Find Your Fate idea, I think very likely, and I think kids maybe nowadays more expect things to be in a series. So yeah, that might have more of a continuity if they were to do that. And I would suspect that it would be tied to whatever story that they're trying to do for that young reader book.
Numbering the books like they did in this series and like R.L. Stine would do with Goosebumps also helps encourage that collectability. I know as a kid, I was like trying to figure out which issue or which books from the Goosebumps series I was missing and things like that, So it definitely helps encourage it, whether the mindset is, I need them all or not. The titles are listed on the inside there.
Yeah, when you get down to book 19, you've got a long list of things you need to be bugging your parents for. But oddly enough, they're not numbered on the list on the inside.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they're in the correct order if you look at the actual publication order.
Interesting.
But that's a very unnumbered list.
Yeah.
So I guess collect them all.
No numbers, no authors.
Right.
Just titles.
Just titles.
So number 15, Operation Time Machine is by Lynn Beach. Interesting because Time Machine is a series of choose your own adventure books also.
Yep.
And you are genius in this one. Maybe a lofty title there for a Joe, you know. But definitely an encouraging code name for a kid, you know, to make them feel a valuable asset to the Joe team. You know, what can I offer? Well, I'm a genius.
Yeah, and Lynn Beach also popped in the Transformers. We talked about Lynn Beach popping in other series.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a Transformers Attack of the Insecticons. That's a Lynn Beach story.
Nice. There's Time Machine. There's some dinosaurs on the cover. It's got bats shooting a machine gun and Dusty and some Crimson Guards. I'm not sure that that's my favorite artwork in the series. None of these guys are in their card art poses. I don't know if this is Hector Greedo or not, but this one does have the Live the Adventure moniker on the top there.
The Crimson Guard appeared on a lot of these covers, mostly the Hector Garrido covers. It looks like, yeah. Well, but yeah, that we've got Crimson Guardsmen on like tons of these. I don't recall if they're actually in all of the stories, but they're in a lot of the artwork.
No, they're not.
This is a Hector Garrido cover. It just doesn't use the card art poses as much as most of them seem to do. Number 16, Operation Poison Dart is by Megan and H. William Stine again. And in that one, your headset. The 17th book, Operation Sink or Swim. You are Brainstorm, a lightning quick strategist. I think that's a pretty good name, Brainstorm. I could see that being a code name for a guy.
Better than headset.
Better than headset. Sink or Swim's also a pretty good title. I think it's got that alliteration and like, oh, we're going to either succeed or we're going to fail, which is so perfect for Choose Your Own Adventure. It kind of, the title just works for the brand of itself there. Number 18 is Operation Killer Comet by S.M. Ballard, and you are Cat. I don't have that book. I was trying to determine if this one might be a book where there's a feminine lean to the you character. It's always very generic, but like the artwork in some of them, you can tell the kid is a boy. But with the code name of Cat CAT, I wasn't really sure. But that's an odd code name, I feel like.
I don't
Uncanny
have
Agility.
Uncanny Agility.
That's
you always land on your feet.
I think these are all male stand-in characters.
They probably are, but that was the only one that stood out to me as like, oh, that one doesn't quite fit the mold of the other ones.
And I don't have book 18 in front of me, but I think they're all male characters. When we get into Jim and the Holograms, we get into some female characters, because it's that licensing and branding for the toy companies. But the rest of them are really very masculine.
Number 19 is Operation Tiger Strike by William Snow. I love the cover with the tiger leaping over Snake Eyes.
Snake Eyes is always good.
Yeah. That's a really cool painting of Storm Shadow, I think. That's just a very ninja-like pose. That's groovy. I dig that.
You are Sting, one of the Joe team's top martial artists. Because they needed more ninjas.
Yeah.
Always need more ninjas.
Everybody's a ninja now.
Yep.
And then the 20th book, number 20, Serpentor and the Mummy Warrior by R.L. Stine. Very R.L. Stine topic to pick, like Egyptian mummies here. And you are Bombshell, the meanest, nastiest, most fearless G.I. Joe.
Now, Bombshell, I believe, did become a G.I. Joe code name, but much later.
Okay.
I don't have that one, and that's the one I want the most because it has Serpentor, and I'm really curious how they treat Serpentor in that series. I've got to get my hands on it.
But that's one of the lower production books. It's Serpentor on the cover, being all gorgeous and Serpentor-y.
Yeah.
So if you're a Serpentor fan, you want it. It's an R.L. Stine book, so they want it. It's one of the more expensive books.
Yeah.
But Stine had also worked with mummies and some of the other Choose Your Own Adventure sort of books had written for Twist a Plot. You get the chills, the thrills, the screams, and get some mummies in there too. So
nice. Yeah, so it's a cool list. It's definitely something I would love to hear from viewers in the comments. Like, which ones did you have as a kid? Did you read any of these? Did you have any success? What's your favorite code name from these series of books?
Well, I mean, Sting is the name of a musical artist, so that's amusing to me. It could be the artist formerly known as Sting. I like Wise Guy. I like it. It's kind of I don't know, sort of like an undercover agent sort of code name.
Yeah, I could see that.
Absolutely.
Well, I felt like we probably need to read at least one of these horrible endings, so I'm skimming for a random ending in the middle of a book. Maybe we can each find one ending to read.
Yeah. Let's see.
So I've got. I'm just reading basically the last paragraph here. We've cleared up the situation here, Flint says, but there's more to be done in Madison, Wisconsin. Meet us there at 1300 hours. Well, it looks like the fun will have to wait because all the work and no play is exactly what you signed up for, Joe. The end. So that's a successful ending right there.
I'm going to go with number 19 by Snow. And here's our last paragraph. Destro scowls. His clothes are wrinkled. His house is torn up. He never got the crest, and his head is throbbing. He turns to the guests, and he says, the pleasure was all yours.
I can't top that. But I do have one that ought to be quite monumentous in the history of G.I. Joe. This is from number 14. And this is actually, I guess, the final ending. It's page 88 in that series. And I won't read the whole page, but the gist of it is, and this illustration shows it perfectly, that is a big rig in the ocean that is being blown up with Cobra Commander and Destro on it. So I guess they're dead now and the war is over.
All right. Well, I appreciate you guys coming on. This was a fun conversation. I couldn't think of two better people to have for this topic. Do you want to take a moment to plug anything you're working on, or at least, mention your channel and where to find your works again before we leave?
Go ahead, Brian.
Hooded Cobra Commander 788 on YouTube, or HCC 788. I do G.I. Joe toy reviews and occasionally some other things. I had a hiatus from doing regular review videos, but I'm finally getting back into that. But I also have a live show every Tuesday, and we have fun. And sometimes we'll read one of these, and we have a blast.
And I'm John in Withers IV. My books are on Amazon. They're all interactive fiction, all choice-based, sometimes with dice or Plinko boards or other sorts of tools, sometimes just straight choice-based like these are. Probably for a little bit older audience than what we're looking at here today. But what I really want to plug is voidspacezine.com. I've got one piece up there, but it's a neat collection of digital choice-based works and a wide variety of media experiences. So I'm pleased to be in their 5th volume and hopefully in more in the future.
Awesome. All right, guys, thanks for being on here, and everyone watching, thanks for hanging on the peg with us.
Bye.